Welcome everyone for our webinar on exploring the Metric Insights BI portal. My name is Zoe and I'll be walking through some slides, and I have my boss here, Mike. Say hi, Mike.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining today.
And he will be jumping in on a demo in just a little bit. So again, just go through the agenda before we kick off some slides. Today I'm going to cover some BI challenges that we see today, a little bit about the Metric Insights platform, and then Mike, again, he will jump into the product demo. We will have a Q&A, so if you have any questions, please drop the questions into the Q&A window, and we will try to get to all of them at the end here. I will also be sending the recording to the webinar later today, so if you have any further questions, please just respond to that email, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. So the challenge that we are seeing today is that despite billions of dollars being spent on BI, utilization and engagement is actually pretty low. And it's not uncommon when we talk to companies that we see scenarios where less than 60% of the reports and dashboards are actually being looked at. Consequently, a lot of the BI tool licenses that are being paid for are actually not being used. And this means there's a lot of wasted time as business users are picking up the phone to analysts to get their questions answered rather than engaging with BI. And if BI is not being used, we're going to be missing critical events. And at Metric Insights, we believe these issues are due to a lack of governance around the BI process. And that lack of governance leads to cluttered BI environments as thousands of reports and dashboards are getting created. Environments where duplicated and obsolete content hides the reports that you actually want your business users to engage with, and compounded by the fact that all organizations have multiple BI tools and reporting everywhere from their operational systems to spreadsheets and documents. The diagram here that I'm going to show you is going to show the different components of the Metric Insights platform before Mike goes into the demo to cover this. So firstly, we have plugins, and plugins connect to every source of BI within the organization. That's everything from BI tools to reporting and SaaS applications, spreadsheets, and databases. Our plugins enable the platform to be aware of all the BI that is being created within the organization. We then have what we call as publishing workflows. And publishing workflows allow you to create a set of content for your users. This means I'm going to publish and certify just the reports that I want people to be working with. And as part of this publishing process, you can add metadata to the reports to ensure users can discover them and fully understand what they are. This then enables you to maintain a catalog of certified content for your users. And that is tied to your security model where users can come in and browse and search for content that they need and knowing that they can trust it. And finally, as well as providing users with the searchable catalog, we enable you to create very customized user experiences for each of your personas that will guide them through the BI that's most relevant to them. And I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and let Mike jump into a demo to show some examples.
Yeah, thanks, Zoe. So yeah, what I want to do is basically take you through those layers of the platform there that Zoe just touched on. I'm just going to share my screen here. And as she said up front, if you have questions, pop them into the Q&A window, and I'll try and keep an eye on them as we go along, or we can get to them at the end. But yeah, so I want to take you through sort of those 4 or 5 layers of what Zoe touched on, and show you how that sort of materializes itself in the platform. And initially, what you're seeing here is sort of the Metric Insights system running through my browser in this case. And initially, I'm logged in here as an administrator on the platform, or a power user, if you like. You know, someone typically in the business intelligence team who's responsible for publishing and curating content for users. And what you're looking at here is, I'm on this first tab, the catalog, this centralized catalog where we're basically organizing content for our users. And we'll look at how this content actually got in here in a minute. But essentially, the idea behind the catalog is that we can curate out of all that content that Zoe touched on, connecting to multiple sources, thousands of reports out there. Out of that content, we want to curate the reports and dashboards and metrics that we want users actually engaging with. So what you're looking at here is sort of the end result of that, where each of these tiles that you see in the middle is a particular asset that we've published into this catalog. And you'll see that I've got stuff coming from Tableau, Power BI, Click, MicroStrategy. We've got some spreadsheets and documents in here that are being hosted up on a file store or SharePoint. Again, regardless of where the content is, we want to publish it into this centralized place. So each tile is essentially an asset. Think of it as a report or a dashboard that we've published. And again, we'll look at how these get in here in a minute, but let's just talk about what exactly is behind a tile. And if we take something like this Tableau workbook here, so this sales analysis tile, if I click on that, so what our plugins do is they essentially, make us aware of every, in this case, workbook that's getting created in our Tableau server. When I publish a particular workbook as a tile, essentially, the first thing we do is we pick up through our plugins any metadata from Tableau, in this case, about this particular asset. So that's obviously, the name of it, the sales analysis workbook. It's we pick up an image of what the dashboard looks like each time it updates. So this preview image here is a recent, representation of the actual dashboard after the last time it updated. We also get things like, in Tableau's case, things like tags, things like the last time it updated in the source system. So anything we can get from the underlying tool, depending on what it is, we pull that in and make it available in alongside the content, in this case, in this preview window. And what you'll see when we look at the publishing process is that we also allow you to add additional metadata into the system. So things like, maybe definitions and glossary terms. So what metrics does this particular dashboard contain? How are they calculated? Who's responsible for those definitions? You can build up a glossary of terms. Things like ownership of the content. So you may have, a technical owner, you may have a business owner, you may have someone from the governance team who is responsible for the content behind this. And really any sort of categorization that is important, you think, to the end users. So it may be things like, a classification of the content. Is it for internal use? Is it public-facing information? Does it contain private information, personal identifiable information, or not? So, again, the user gets some context around what this particular dashboard is and how it should be used. I will just note here that, again, this metadata can come from multiple sources. So I mentioned some we get from the tool itself. Some can be added as part of the publishing process that we'll see in a minute. Some might be synchronized in from things like your data catalog tools, whether that's a Calibra or an Elation or a Purview, where you're recording some of this information. Regardless, we can attach it to this particular asset. Oftentimes, as well, as part of the publishing process, we will certify content. So you'll see this check mark at the top, that it was certified by a particular user on a particular date. And you can have different levels of certification, say bronze, silver, gold, whatever it might be, depending on how you manage content and publishing in your organization. The idea, again, giving users a sense of, what scrutiny, if you like, the dashboard has got as part of the publishing process, and then, who's essentially accountable for that certification. Now, if I click into this particular asset, I've decided this is something I'm interested in. Effectively, what we do then is, for this particular user, we do a single sign-on into the underlying tool. So I'm passing, in this case, my credentials into Tableau. It's using Trusted Auth in Tableau's case, if you're using that. And I'm now accessing the live Tableau dashboard embedded inside the Metric Insights portal. So I'm getting the same experience that I would get if I went directly to Tableau without having to, again, understand that this particular dashboard was built in Tableau or whatever tool. And without getting lost in that underlying technology, I'm just accessing it directly within the portal. Now we'll come back and look at some of this additional functionality in a minute, but just to hammer the point home, I guess, the same experience, whether I'm looking at Tableau, whether I'm looking at something from Power BI, again, I can have the relevant metadata. The only difference being if I drill into that particular piece of content, I'm accessing now Power BI in the middle here rather than Tableau. And that goes all the way to, not just the BI tools, at the other end of the scale, if we're publishing, say, a spreadsheet or a PDF or a document that's sitting up on a file store or up on SharePoint or a cloud file store, I can access that content in the same way. I can have access to similar metadata that gets added as part of the publishing process. So the idea is that we publish this content, we can organize it in a single hierarchy, if you like, that makes sense for your business. So we can create a hierarchy of categories down the bottom here that represent how you want to organize content in your organization, regardless, again, of where that content came from. One of the challenges today is that, if we're using, say, Tableau, Power BI, and SharePoint, as a user, I have to essentially understand the organizational paradigms of each of those technologies. In Tableau's case, sites and projects, in Power BI apps or workspaces, and SharePoint folders. I have to understand those organizational paradigms to be able to find the content I'm looking for. Well, we can remove that complexity by organizing it in a single way for users. So we create a catalog of content, we organize it. We'll talk about security in a minute and permissions, but essentially then, as a user, I have one place to come and browse content. As an analyst, I have one place to come and publish content in the organization. Let's just drill back into one of these tiles for a minute and touch on some additional things that we provide. I'm going to take actually this Tableau tile again here. So obviously one of the benefits of embedding content within the viewer is what we were just talking about, making sure people don't get lost as they navigate into these different tools. But we can also wrap functionality around the content that is consistent across tools as well. I just want to touch on a couple of those things. So it's things like, obviously, the metadata that we spoke about. So being able to have a consistent way of providing metadata regardless of what the tool's capabilities are behind the scenes. It's the ability to do things like attach documentation to content. So if you have sort of help notes or release notes or documents that are associated with a particular dashboard, you can attach that, whether it's PDFs, whether it's linking out to wikis, whatever it might be, you can attach that to the content. We provide some lineage around what is sourcing the content and where else it is being used. So in this case, this particular Tableau dashboard is obviously coming from a Tableau site that we've set up. That workbook is being driven by a data source. In this case, is coming from a table within, I think this is actually driven from Snowflake, but I can see sort of the source of data within that particular dashboard. I can also look forward and see where this particular workbook is being used in our system. So we're going to talk about sort of distribution and pushing out content via email and other sources. So I have a sense of where content is being used in things like distributions or alerts that we'll look at in a minute. So basic lineage on the content. I can do things like share content with other users, obviously taking into account the permissions that we'll talk about. I can subscribe to content in a consistent way that we'll look at in a minute. And I can also collaborate with users with a consistent sort of collaboration, note-taking functionality where we can have conversations around the data. This is metric insights down the bottom here. So yeah, I can converse around Tableau or spreadsheet or whatever the content is that gets memorialized with the content as well. One other thing that our plugins give us as we connect to content, depending on the source, but you know, with the BI tools that we connect to at least, is we also can understand the dimensionality of content and dashboards. And by that, I mean, you know, if you have different filter values within different dashboards, a lot of our plugins can understand what those filter values are. And what that gives us is a consistent way of providing what we call a global filtering capability. So what that means is across the top here, you'll see that I've got this channel, product category, country filter. These are metric insights filters that are being driven by the filters that are in the underlying dashboard. And I'm just showing them here for the sake of showing what's going on. But the reason we do that is we can provide a couple of things. One is a bookmarking capability. So if I am navigating through content, I can save bookmarks, save filter combinations that are specific to me that I can jump to very quickly. And those bookmarks can be user-driven, like I'm doing here, so I could save a bookmark, or they can be programmatically driven as well. So what that means is that we can map different users to different slices of data. So when they come into the portal, you know, if I open this dashboard, it can automatically filter it to my region. If you were to come in, it could automatically filter it to your region. And we can use these filters now across content. So I may be looking or be filtered to, say, country within this Tableau dashboard. If I was then navigating in my session to another dashboard, even if that was in another tool, so I could go back to our Power BI dashboard here, it recognizes that that country is a filter on this Power BI dashboard as well, and it associates the two. It recognized that I was filtered to Canada in that other tool, and it can maintain those filter values as I navigate through content within my session. And so, we take away that need to, every time I open a dashboard, have to filter it down to what I was looking at. I then jump to another tool or another dashboard, I have to filter it down again. This will persist those filter values within my session. So if we go back to our catalog here, so a couple of other things before we sort of look at the publishing process. So some functionality that's available within the catalog. We talked about the category structure, which organizes the content. Users can also have the privilege to create folders of content. Think of these as sort of logical groupings of content that I'm interested in. So pulling content from different sources, dragging them into a folder that I then may want to share with other users. So this might be our executive folder that has the content that we look at every day. Again, it's just another organizational paradigm within the system. And by dragging a tile or clicking on a star, I can also create sort of a personal set of favorites that I see all the time when I come in. This is what I've curated that I'm interested in. So different ways of sort of organizing content, again, irrespective of the underlying tool that content exists in. Very quickly, I'm just going to touch on sort of the security and permissions piece of this. So obviously, there is permissions associated with content in your organization, who has access to which reports and dashboards. We have obviously a security model within Metric Insights. The quick sort of explanation of this is the security model determines who sees what in terms of the different tiles and categories of content. And we will synchronize that up with your enterprise security so that you don't have to manage it again within Metric Insights. And that's, ultimately, typically, synchronizing with Active Directory and LDAP structures, or it's synchronizing with the underlying tool security. Again, the net result being that when a user accesses the system, the portal, they're only going to see content that they have permission to see. So, that relates to browsing through the content itself. We also have search capabilities, so I can come in and search for content within the system. We do some natural language processing against those search terms. It's a Google-style experience where we rank search results based on the relevancy of what you're searching for. It's searching across all the content that I have access to. I can go and start to filter out by, any of that metadata that we were speaking about before. So things like just show me the certified content or whatever it might be that I'm interested in. And I can drill into that content then and look at it in more detail. The one, if you like, exception to sort of the permissions and security piece of this. So I said that when you search and browse, we're only looking through content that you have access to. The exception to that is that you can publish content into the portal in what we call a discoverable way. And what that means is, I just logged in as a different user here in a different browser, is that if I search for content, say, show me all reports as it relates to procurement data as an example, it will bring me back the content that I have access to. It will also show me any content that has been published in what we call a discoverable way. So in this case, it's showing me a procurement dashboard that's out there, but I actually don't have access to that right now. It's blurred out the image. It's showing me the metadata around that dashboard, and it enables me to essentially then request access to that content if it's something that I'm interested in. And so it would, open an access request ticket now to this and the owners of this particular content, who can decide whether they're going to give me access to it. So let's talk a little bit about how content gets into the catalog itself. So it starts with the concept of connecting to the different data sources in your organization. So if we take maybe, Power BI as an example. So when we set up Metric Insights, we will use those plugins that Zoe was talking about to set up connections to your different instances of these different tools. So I'm using Power BI as an example here. We're connected to Power BI in the cloud in this case, connecting to our instance. The plugin is authenticating against that application in whatever way makes sense for the technology that we're working with. It's integrating with the APIs for that system, and it is essentially then able to maintain a list of assets that are available on that particular application. So in this case, it's going out to a Power BI instance, and it's maintaining a list of dashboards and data sets and reports that are available out there on Power BI. Now, these are not getting published into the catalog at this point. It's purely saying, okay, these are candidates that are created in Power BI that we might want to add into the catalog and make available to users. The way they get into the catalog depends on how you are managing content in the underlying technology in your organization. So one way they can get in is I can now manually go and add content from these different technologies. And by manually adding content, I mean manually creating one of those tiles that we were looking at in the catalog. So I can go and pick one of the dashboards from Power BI and actually add it as a tile into the system. Now, typically not a way that you go through publishing content one by one, but it's possible to do that. The other end of the scale is, let's say we were pointing this data source at Power BI, and maybe there was a particular workspace or set of workspaces or applications where we are telling people within Power BI to publish their production-ready content that has been tested and QA'd. If we are doing that, we can turn on what we call content synchronization, which means anytime a piece of content gets added to that workspace, we will automatically instrument a tile within the Metric Insights catalog and make it automatically available in a category within Metric Insights, and anyone who has access to that category will start seeing the content. Conversely, if you remove it from Power BI, it will get removed from the catalog. So we're basically synchronizing the content with the underlying tool. A sort of middle ground to that is, if you don't want to do it one by one and you don't want to, synchronize everything the moment it gets created, the middle ground is we have what Zoe talked about within the slides briefly, is we have this idea of publishing workflows. And what a publishing workflow is that, when we recognize new content gets added into the underlying system, we basically assign it to a queue, if you like. We put it into a queue where different users in the organization will then be responsible for different stages within a publishing workflow to say whether that particular piece of content gets published, and adding in any additional metadata that we spoke about before certifying it for end users. And workflows can be as simple as, stuff comes into the queue, there's a single step where someone reviews it, maybe they're responsible again for, adding certain metadata, tagging it, classifying it, assigning ownership to it before it ultimately gets certified and added into the correct category. Or, maybe it's our financial reporting and it gets more scrutiny, the developer signs off on it, the CFO looks at it before it goes live, our data stewards confirm that the content is correct before, maybe it gets a gold level of certification and gets added to the catalog. So the middle ground is we set up these publishing workflows where content sort of flows through a process that we want, the content that we want published before it gets in. The final thing within this as well is, all BI within your organization typically has sort of a shelf life. So it's as you look at engagement with content, you publish a report, gets used for a period of time, the business changes, or the need for that report diminishes. Oftentimes those reports sort of hang around and contribute to the clutter that Zoe spoke about. Well, reality is we really want to remove those from the catalog when that occurs. So these workflows can also have sort of a review or an attestation stage associated with them that can be sort of time triggered. So, we can add content to the catalog and then say, after it's sat there for a month, 3 months, 6 months, we're going to flag it for review and assign it back to the owners of that content so that they can go and look at it and make a decision around whether it's still relevant, whether they need to update it, whether they should be, retiring it from the catalog and taking it out. So, it's not just about sort of a one-time publish and thing and done. It's about, then continually reviewing the content that I have out there as a publisher of content to make sure it's still relevant. And we'll talk about in a minute how we decide whether that is still relevant or not to those users. So that's how content gets into the catalog. It's how we manage, we make sure we're curating just the content that users are interested in, and we're keeping it fresh and clean. When stuff comes up for review, how do we decide whether it's still relevant or not? Well, there's a couple of ways. One is within our content center as a publisher of content, we track engagement of that content. So we understand who is using it over time. And engagement for us is tracked at the individual asset level, so which reports and dashboards are getting used, at the individual user level, so which users are accessing those assets over time, and by aggregated by different user groups, categories, data sources, types of access, and this content may be accessed in many different ways. So it may be that we're accessing it through the portal, maybe that we're accessing content ultimately still directly within the underlying tools. maybe that we're receiving it in our email or accessing it on the mobile apps. Wherever it's being accessed, we come up with sort of this engagement figure, so that over time we can see a trend of who's looking at the content. Are they coming in regularly to look at it? Are they, looking at it once but then never come in again? So we have different analysis against the content then. So a user can, a publisher of the content can make some decisions about, whether people are still engaging with it, and, whether that is increasing or decreasing over time. So this is looking at, usage over time by month for this particular report. Usage is one indicator, right? So if people stop using it, it's one indicator that it's being, it's sort of reaching its sell-by date. Another thing you can do is collect feedback on the content. So we have this concept of what we call feedback prompts, where you can set up, different questions that you might want to ask users. You might want to ask them to sort of rate it in sort of a net promoter score type way. You can set up these different prompts. These prompts can be triggered on the content. So similar to, you might see sort of feedback on a website, you can choose to sort of trigger people to provide feedback on a particular schedule so that you're not sort of spamming them too much for feedback. Or they can, you can enable people to provide feedback, self-driven. So I can come and provide feedback just by clicking on the icon here. But essentially the net result is that I can combine, if I look at an individual piece of content, I can combine that engagement that we're getting with it with any ratings or feedback that users are giving, so the more subjective type information, to again make a decision around whether it's actually, engagement is dropping off because I need to make some improvements, or engagement is dropping off because this report is out of date and no longer useful to people. So that's some of the functionality, more from sort of a power user, if you like, a curator of content perspective. Obviously, yes, you can also give users access to this catalog. And when a user accesses the catalog, again, just to sort of hammer the point home, they're only going to see the categories of content that they have access to that are discoverable to them. So, I'm logged in as Sam here. Obviously, I can't edit these tiles anymore. I've only got access to a few of the categories and a couple of the folders that I've been given access to. Zoe touched on it very briefly within the presentation. In order to, if the net result is here, we're trying to drive engagement with content. Giving people to a catalog that they can come and browse and search through is a step in the right direction. I can just come and find stuff in one place. But what we find in, particularly large organizations, users still have access to a lot of content. And reality is, on most days, there's a subset of that content that they're engaging with, that they're taking a journey with, if you like, to help them with their job on a day-to-day basis. And it's usually just a few bits of content that they're engaging with, but oftentimes across different tools and technologies. So what we want to give them is essentially an experience on top of the catalog here that leads them through that content in a meaningful way. And we do that through the concept of being able to create customized UIs, customized user experiences, user interfaces on top of the catalog. And these are, think of them as almost mini websites, if you like, that lead a persona through a journey with their content. And I'm going to show you a couple of examples, but these things are super flexible. Effectively think about anything you could do when you were building a web page. You can effectively do that with what we call portal pages in our environment. But to give you an idea of what I mean by that, often it means creating some sort of landing page for users, like you might be looking at here. And don't get held up on sort of the look and feel and the design and the colors. This can be branded and, you know, organized in any way that makes sense to your organization. But it might be that, you know, it's giving people, you know, quick access to folders of reports that they're responsible for, so they don't have to necessarily drill through tiles from the catalog view. They can very quickly come and, you know, drive across the content that they're looking at without having to click in and out of it. You know, even though, again, this content might be coming from different tools and technologies. So very easy navigation is typically one use case. Something we haven't gone into in depth on this demo, but something our plugins as well allow us to do is actually tap into the data behind dashboards as well. So if there's, you know, a dozen different reports that I'm interested in every day, but, you know, maybe I'm a manager or an exec where there's certain metrics from those reports that I'm interested in, well, we can create a page, you know, similar to this, where we're actually pulling those metrics out of those dashboards and rendering them on a page where it's looking at their performance, we're analyzing the metrics, and even though these metrics are all coming from different tools and technologies, as a manager now, I can look across the departments that I'm responsible for, see how these metrics are performing, and if I see something interested, even if I'm sort of filtering through these, if I see something interesting that I want to drill into more, I could click on that. And again, it could take me straight to that particular dashboard. It could pass the filters that I was looking at for that metric. I can look at it in more detail. So it's kind of leading me to the analysis that's most interesting to me. So that's one use case of these sort of custom UIs. Maybe we'll include some, you know, non-portal information as well, knowledge bases, FAQs, educational videos. Give me one place to access all this content. Another use case that we see often is using these UIs to mash up content. So maybe I'm a regional manager, you know, responsible for, in this case, the Canada region. There's a number of analysis that I look at each day. This one is actually, excuse me. This one is actually coming from Tableau. These two are coming from Power BI. This is actually a MicroStrategy report. These are live reports coming from these tools that are embedded in the environment. And we're rendering those, we're mashing them up on one page because this is, you know, what I look at every day. I want to be able to easily see these. I maybe want to be able to use those global filters I talked about before. Maybe I'm, you know, globally responsible for this content. I want to look across those countries, across these different charts. In this case, it's pulling out individual worksheets and visualizations from these different technologies. I don't have to navigate to these different reports and dashboards every day. So mashing up content is another use case of this. So generally, you know, again, we can use these what we call portal pages to give a user a very customized experience around the content that they're interested in. And, you know, obviously, if they want to search into the catalog or browse through it, they still have the ability to go back and look for other content that they might have access to. So we can present content through portal pages. We can also, I touched on this briefly, we can also enable users to subscribe to content. So, you know, users can self-subscribe to content. So send me this through my daily report bursts that I'm getting, report digest, we call these bursts. If I'm a user with the privilege to do so, I can drag content into a folder and I can share that content via a burst on a particular schedule with users. So I can set up a schedule. I can deliver that via email or different technologies. I can push this to Slack or Teams and basically customize a distribution for users. Whether I'm self-subscribing or pushing it out to users, the net result is, and again, these emails can be customized to your organization and your look and feel, but the net result is I can receive a digest on that schedule that brings together all the content I'm interested in. regardless of the tool or technology that it might be coming from behind the scenes. And as I mentioned before, these images are up-to-date images. When the burst goes out, we're sending what the dashboard looked like the last time it updated. So, in some cases, I can browse through this email and get all the info that I need. One final thing on distribution related to those triggers that I spoke about, those metrics that I spoke about before in the portal page where we're looking at those high-level metrics. We can do sort of event-driven and data-driven distributions as well. So, we can look at metrics within dashboards. Sorry, let's show this one. We can look at metrics within dashboards. If we find unusual values with, say, sales in a particular region, or it triggers an alert rule that I've set up, we can send that particular dashboard to someone, again, with an image pre-filtered to what that particular dashboard looked like for the alert that was being triggered, and again, enable them to drill into that content and look at it in more detail. So that's sort of a whirlwind tour of those different layers that Zoe was touching on in that platform slide that she looked at. I wanted to spend a couple of minutes on one final thing. I know we sort of teased this within the promotion of this sort of webinar. Touch on one final thing that's getting released in the platform in the next couple of months, related to integrations with some of this new AI technology that we're seeing out in the space, LLMs, that sort of thing. And then I see some questions popping up in the Q&A window, so we'll spend a few minutes answering those as well. But I'm just going to jump across to some slides here. I realize we're going through a lot of content in this webinar, so again, if there are questions, I would encourage you to enter them into the Q&A window. So there is obviously a lot of hype at the moment around things like ChatGPT, OpenAI, LLMs, large language models in general. A lot of BI vendors are busy building integrations into these technologies. We are no different. We are working on an integration right now with LLMs and utilizing some of the power of that technology within the portal that we've just been looking at. I just wanted to touch on the use case that we were initially launching with, maybe interesting to some of you. We are using the integration in with initially GPT-4 from OpenAI to enhance our search capabilities. And what that means, just to give you a flavor of that, is so what we looked at in the demo just now was the idea of sort of what we refer to as BI search. And really that's sort of a Google style search experience where you can enter a term. It will often come back with hundreds of results, but we rank them based on the relevancy of that term, with the idea that we can bubble up the most relevant assets for you at the top of the list. Again, similar to Google. Now, what that search is very good at is for finding stuff that you kind of already know is out there. You're just trying to, you don't know where it is, or you don't know exactly where it is or what it's called. If I put in a search term like sales analysis report, it's oftentimes going to get me that in the first couple of responses in the search results. What search isn't super optimized around is more of a discovery type experience where, I might be asking a question like, something's happened in my region, maybe, gross margin is looking weird in the region that I'm responsible for. And I want to know whether there's any reports out there that can help me answer that particular question. And so we're creating this sort of concierge-like experience, similar to, obviously, the analogy here is a hotel concierge, where, I can go and do all the research of a particular city or country that I'm visiting online or with guidebooks, or I can go and ask a very knowledgeable concierge about what I should be doing and where I should be visiting in that area. Well, we want to provide that concierge-like experience to our users as it relates to discovering content within the system. So, to show you some screenshots here of what that looks like, what it's going to enable is for me to ask questions of the concierge. So can you recommend a report that I can use to figure out why gross sales dropped in Canada? Yeah, if I was to put that in search, I would probably get a whole lot of reports associated with that. But what an LLM is very good at is taking that question and deciphering the intent behind it and working with our search engine behind the scenes to come back with a more sort of curated set of results here. So, I've entered the question, it's understand my intent. On the left-hand side, it's saying, yeah, sure, here's some suggestions around reports that can maybe answer that question. So it's suggested 3 reports here. What we're doing is building up a carousel of those reports, so a user can then come and start to navigate through them and look at what's included within them. And oftentimes when these conversations happen, it's not sort of a one-time question done thing. Obviously, the power of some of these models that are out there is I can continue the conversation there to drill into what it is I'm looking for. So, help me understand why gross sales have dropped. Yeah, I'm actually interested in understanding sort of how this breaks down by channels. Do any of those reports contain sort of a channel breakdown, or can you recommend a report that takes that information and breaks it down by channel? And obviously, I can enter that. It will continue the conversation with me and start to come up with a recommendation around the content that I should be looking at. And what GPT-4 and other LLMs are very good at is having these conversational interactions with users, in this case for the purpose of uncovering and discovering content that I might be interested in. So it's a very, sort of quick teaser. I know Zoe has some webinars that we've recorded out on our YouTube channel that cover this in more detail. I encourage you to go and look at those and understand what we're doing in this space. I think it becomes very interesting to sort of take some of the onus off of your analysts who are forever fielding conversations with users about, do we have this report? Can we find this report? Help me answer this particular question. What content should I be looking at?